The following program contains archived content. Some of the information may now be out of date.
Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello listeners, welcome along to our segment called Big Little Small Talk, where I go out and talk to someone interesting in the community. And today I've got someone very interesting. I know that I always say that, but today I really have. And her name is Sandy Martin, and she's the president of the Queensland State Rose Garden at Newtown Park here in Toowoomba. And if you've ever been there, you'll know that it is an absolutely stunning park. And there's a lot of history and a lot of things go on at the park, and Sandy's going to tell me about it. So welcome along, Sandy.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, very well. Now, thank you for having me here. I'm going to read you out something, and it says, "Roses have a place in religion, art, myth and medicine, and are the world's most popular decorative motif. Most roses are of the ancient world, which were cultivated in China from 1737 to 2697 BC. Do you know anything about the history of roses? I would imagine you would.
Well, probably not quite that far back. But roses have certainly come down through history and certainly have a place in our culture and our lifestyle. And roses sort of stand for different things for different people and are used for celebrating significant occasions. You know, roses are often given to people for birthdays and weddings and all that sort of thing. So they have a definite place. And a lot of the roses we have today have roots back that far in history and have been developed and bred so that they fit more into our lifestyle. For example, a lot of the historic roses were only once flowering. They had beautiful perfume, but they only flowered in spring once a year. But a lot of those have been crossed with other roses, which now give us reflowering throughout the season roses that are perfumed.
Yes, the perfect rose. Now, I said to you before we started about doing the interview, and you said, "Oh, don't worry, I've done lots and lots of interviews." Just recently you did a segment, was it for Gardening Australia? So
Yes.
tell me about that.
Well, I actually filmed it last November, but it only went to air about 6 weeks ago. And of course, when we filmed, the rose garden was full of roses. By the time they put it to air, they'd all been pruned.
Okay.
But
that
anyway,
didn't matter, did it?
Well, it did to some people, but the park is still lovely. And the park has never been designed to add to carnival because the roses are pruned in July. They can't be pruned earlier because if they get new shoots and they get frosted, that's a problem. So they only get pruned then. They then come into flower in October. But they then go right through spring, summer, autumn, and then get pruned again the next July. So they're extending the city's floral display for 12 months of the year, not just that. Well, this year it was the month of September.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But we did have an offering though. We've got some swags up with chains between poles, and they've got Banksia roses on them, and they were a picture this year for Carnival.
So let's talk about the State Rose Garden. What does it mean to be... How did you get the status of being the State Rose Garden, and when did you start? Was it about 1999? Would that be right?
Well, that was when the proposal was put forward to council, and 3 men, local businessmen, went to council with the proposal that we should have an international standard rose garden in the city. And they were Peter Elrich, Ray Polton and John Orford. And that was where the idea came from. And it was started in 2000. So this year
in
is
Newtown Park?
Yes.
Right.
And that was chosen because it was a park that didn't have a lot of development in it, but also being on the other side of western side of town, it's not as subject to the fog and mists that we are. So the roses aren't subject to as much disease,
Moisture.
particularly bacterial and fungal.
Black spot.
Yes.
Look
those
at me.
things.
Look at me. I know my roses. That's about my only piece of knowledge. So we'll keep going, Sandy, because
Yes.
I'm sure you're
So
going to
that
tell
was,
me more.
Yes, and then it's gone from there. There was the group was formed that would help direct and support it, and they've worked tirelessly ever since. They've not only put in rose gardens, and they've also put in physical structures. There's pathways and seats. There's a car park that we did. There's public toilets that we did. So all those things have been done under the auspices of the Queensland State Rose Garden Group.
Okay. And how did you get the designation? You apply to the state, do you? Was there other state rose gardens or not? Is this the only state rose garden?
This is the only state rose garden in Queensland. We're the Queensland State Rose Garden, which is regarded very jealously by Warwick and Brisbane. They'd love to have had the State Rose Garden. It was lobbied the state government for quite a while to get that, so it's very jealously guarded that we.
And had there not been a state rose garden before that?
No,
okay.
Not in Queensland.
No, right.
No.
And what are the ideal rose growing conditions, or is there no such thing? You
Yes,
say that
there
you
are.
wanted to get away from the moisture.
I've just been on a trip to South Australia. The roses were absolutely spectacular. The buds are almost the size of your fist. But see, they're Mediterranean climate.
Oh.
And because they're Mediterranean, they get winter rain, which brings them on so that when they're pruned and they shoot, they've got all that extra energy and that to shoot beautifully. And then they get dry summers. So they don't get the fungal and the bacterial diseases that we're a lot more prone to. So the roses down there were just absolutely mind-blowing. Yes,
all different
absolutely beautiful.
varieties?
Oh, yes. I went to the National Rose Garden in Adelaide, which is in the Botanical Gardens, and we also went to Renmark, and it was their Rose and Flower Festival. So that was spectacular. And there's roses everywhere. They're in gardens in the street, and they were all in full flower. They have a competition, but it's different to ours. They do get judged, but judging only allows them to open. And they had about 40 gardens in the town and surrounding areas that were open. And there was roses in all of them. But the other thing for me was that's where David Ruston came from. And there's a memorial to him on the banks of the Murray. And there's also where his nursery was. And they're making that into a tourist destination. It has a beautiful cafe and restaurant. And it has all his old beds of old tea roses down the back. It's got a lovely wedding chapel area, open air. And they're also planting beds of there's beds of the new releases from each year. So each year in the last...
In the Ruston collection?
No, not in the Ruston collection. This is just in general roses that have been released each year. So they've got beds labelled with all new releases for different years, probably going back about 15 years. So that was very interesting too.
I was going to ask you, that was one of my questions about the collections that you have, so I can ask you about that now. So you have different things. You have the Ruston collection, you have the Reith Muller collection, Alistair Clark collection. Tell me about those. What's...
Right, well, we'll do the Ruston one first. He passed away, and his niece wanted to make a collection of 100 roses and have them distributed to certain gardens and that around Australia. There was a big list of criteria as to who was eligible, and it had to be public gardens, that were open to the public, and I don't remember what all the others were.
Can I just interrupt you and ask you a rookie question?
Yeah.
Was he someone...
He was a very well-known rose grower and breeder, but he was also a collector. So he had a lot of roses. So she started the ball rolling, and I'm not sure what happened along the way, but the Australian Heritage Rose Association took over in the end and got it launched. So in the garden there's 2 collections of 100 roses, and you'll see them labelled the Heritage Collection. They went to only 4 public gardens in Australia. One was Werribee in Victoria, one was Old Parliament House, Government House in Canberra, in their rose garden, and the other one was at Camden. So we're in very good company, and we were very delighted with that.
And why were we allocated those? Because do you apply, or is it the right conditions?
Yeah, we had to apply. There was a list of conditions, and I can't remember them all, but I know you had to be open to the public.
Oh, you said.
I think you had to have like a friends sort of group that encouraged, and I think there was quite a bit of lobbying from different ones, because Rod Holcomb was still around then, and he was well known in a lot of southern circles, so I think there was a lot of lobbying of that came in too.
So and what
now,
about
the
the
other
Alistair
two?
Clark?
Yeah, well, the other two are both Australian rose growers. Alistair Clark's probably the most famous Australian, and it's the garden that's down behind the cottage towards the corner of Pottinger and Polburton Street. The other one, Neil Reithmuller, he was born at Glenvale but then moved south later in life, and that was one of the reasons he was chosen. Now, a lot of his roses haven't survived or are extremely hard to get, but he has a niece that lives at Crow's Nest, and he had given her a lot of roses, and so she propagated some of her roses and gave them to us for his collection. And we believe that's the largest collection of his roses in the world.
So they're called say, for instance, the Reithmuller roses. That's a certain variety, is it?
That's
a
variety, and the garden is labelled the Reithmuller ones, but all the gardens out there have got plaques on them, and they have a plan of the garden with little circles for each rose and a code in it, and then below the sign is listed the code and the names of the roses. So that's most people, you can follow the sign and work out which rose is which, what its name is.
Right. I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 102.7 FM Community Radio, and we're talking to Sandy Martin today, who's the president of the Queensland State Rose Garden, which is located here in Toowoomba at Newtown Park. Newtown Park. So, Sandy, we started talking before about how you built these beds out of nothing, and it was opened in 2000. So, at the moment, how does all the work get done on the garden? Who does that? Do you have a group of paid people, volunteer people?
Well, the council look after the garden, basically. We have a team of people from the Parks and Gardens department, so there's a team that look after the gardens. So they do the majority of the day-to-day work. Our group do have pruning days, organise them in the middle of the year in July, and the council staff come, and so do people from the Rose Society, and they teach anyone, it's open to the general public, so they'll teach anyone to prune a rose.
Okay, so it's an educational
Yes.
classes. So tell me, I need to know how to prune a rose because I'm making a bit of a hash of mine. So what's the secret?
Well, you have to listen because they do publicity. Radio station does publicity. It's usually about the last or the second last weekend in July on the Saturday morning from about 8 a.m.
Give me a quick. Do you cut out the middle of them? Is that what you do so that they can breathe? Or?
You try and have them so that they're a V shape, basically, so that it allows for air circulation, and that way they get less disease.
More air circulation. What about windy conditions? Is that bad for roses generally? Sometimes
I don't think it hurts the bush so much, but it's more knocks the flowers around if the wind's too strong.
And are scented roses or unscented roses harder to grow, or doesn't make any difference whether they're scented or not? Right.
No. The where we get a lot of the unscented ones now is when you buy a bunch of roses. A lot of them don't have perfume because they've been specifically bred for length of lasting of the blossom, and also the length of stems, so they can be picked as long stem roses.
Okay,
so they're specifically bred for those conditions and those requirements, and they're not the ones, most of them, that you'd see at your nursery and that you could purchase.
Right. So are you saying that if they're longer lasting, they're more likely to be non-scented? Is that the case? Or?
Not necessarily, but those ones have been bred. They're the characteristics that they're looking for rather than worrying about scent, which is a shame because I don't think a rose is a rose without a smell.
Well, it's one of those natural things, isn't it? You see a rose, you go over and you put your nose in it and see whether it's going to smell. That's right.
Absolutely.
So you started talking about the education classes. You can do these pruning classes.
Yes, well, there's that. And then we also help with the deadheading. That means trimming off the spent blossoms so that the rose will shoot and produce more blooms.
And how often do you do that? So how often
we
would
do
gardens
it the last weekend of the month, but we don't do it when they're pruned, of course. So we don't usually start till October. So we do October, November. We don't do December and January because it's too hot and people are too busy with holidays and Christmas and that. And then we start again in February, and we do February, March, April, May.
Once a month for...
At the end of the month.
And if people want to do that, do they have to bring their own clippers and
Yes, they bring a
gloves
bucket, gloves and clippers, and, if it's hot, sunscreen and a hat and water.
Right.
And there'll be members there who will
show you what to do. Okay, that sounds lovely. On a Saturday morning?
On a Saturday morning.
Okay, at what time was it?
It's usually 8 a.m, so it's not too hot, but occasionally we move the time just so that people who can't come at 8 a.m. get a chance throughout the year perhaps to have a go.
How beautiful. So I read somewhere that with the Rose Garden, there's 50 to 70 hours a week from volunteers. Would that be right? Does that sound like a statistic that... correct?
Well, I've certainly probably done
more than that, probably 50 to 70.
With this, our 21st birthday celebration we had.
Tell me about your 21st.
Oh, it was a great day. The weather was beautiful. And
when was it?
The 23rd of October. So it had been going 21 years. So we had the municipal band and the Jim Miller band, and we had the Newtown State School band and choir, and we had the light horse and the animals at war. We had some food vans and stalls, and the mayor spoke, and and we had displays in the hall too, because the hall is rented out and we manage that. So it's rented to other community groups who use it, meet there. So the Rose Society, the Bonsai, the Floral Art, they all meet there, as well as other different community groups. They're not as regular as those, but we also rent it out for some social things. So it gets let out sometimes for wakes, for wedding receptions, christenings and all that sort of thing too.
I was going to ask you about that. So if you wanted to have a wedding in the Rose Garden, how does one go about doing that?
If you want to get married and have a wedding in the Rose Garden, you have to contact the council. We have a wedding gazebo, which is lovely, with all white roses around it. So that is let out by the council. If you want to hire the hall, then you have to contact our group.
Okay.
And the best thing would be to look on the webpage and
find out how to go about it.
Yeah.
And are the volunteers, I read somewhere about raising funds for the gardens. Is that something that you do?
We do.
Yes. And what are some of the things that you do to raise funds?
Well, we've had theatre nights. We regularly do Valentine's Day, and the Floral Art group come and help us, and they make arrangements. We buy in the roses. No one's allowed to pick any of the roses in the Rose Garden, so they're all purchased roses.
So that's across the board. You never cut them.
We never pick them, so that they're there for everyone to enjoy. And we sell potted roses and arrangements, and that money goes into our fundraising lot. We raise some by renting out the hall. We have a Father's Day and a Mother's Day sausage sizzle with Dennis O'Hara's been wonderful. He's played for us for nearly 20 years.
My husband, Dennis O'Hara. No, he's not.
No, I know. You're too young. Dennis has been absolutely wonderful, and he plays this lovely music, and it's lovely sitting there, and we have a sausage sizzle, and there's tea and coffee, and a lot of the members will make little cakes and things, and they're for sale and that too, so that people can have sort of a dessert. And
so is that a morning or an afternoon tea type thing? Or
no, it normally starts round about the 10 o'clock, 10, 11, and goes till about 1, past 1.
Yeah.
So
now, you started to mention before about the 11th Light Horse Regiment. There's a memorial in the Rose Garden, isn't there? So tell me about that. What was the involvement of the 11th Light Horseman Regiment?
That was where they gathered to ride off to war.
Oh, wow.
And one of the reasons they gathered was the park was originally called Pottinger's Park. Pottinger's Paddock. And it was purchased as open space for people on that side of town. It's actually the only large park in Toowoomba that's actually been purchased by the council, because Laurelbank Park was a bequest for a botanical garden, and Queen's Park is technically state government. So it was Pottinger's paddock, and it still had part fencing and it had a ball. So that was why the light horse all gathered there and then marched off to Brisbane to ball.
How interesting.
So, yes, it's
So
a
you
very
have,
historic park and it has a very big history. Well, they came and they had the horses and they raised the flag. And
so this is on your 21st?
On our 21st,
yeah. And
yes.
what's the memorial? When did the memorial go in there?
Oh, I don't really know.
Sure,
It's been there quite a long while,
time,
that one.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you said too about the...
two
about
animals in war
the
memorials.
war memorial. So tell me about those.
One of them has got a rose garden with Charles de Gaulle roses in it, and it's got a sculpture of a horse's head on the top of the memorial. Now, that one was only unveiled in 2018. The other one, I'm not sure how long it's been there. It's been there quite a long while.
And would that have been a group that decided that they want to have that in the park? How did that sort of come about?
That one that was unveiled in 2018, that was a group that Carol Taylor belonged to, and yes, they were the ones that footed the money and proposed that should go in
there.
So,
and tell me about the avenue of trees. What do you know about it? Is it?
Well, a lot of the trees were planted way back. The park actually has a path that goes diagonally both ways through the centre of the park, and that was to represent the St George Cross. So the Rose Garden actually features in 1/4 of the park.
How interesting.
Yes.
I never knew that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a lot of the trees, some of them have been planted since along the avenues, but a lot of the really big trees were planted in the park along.
Bunya pines or what?
Oh, there's a real mixture.
Is a mixture.
Yeah, there's oaks, there's jacarandas, there's Brachycriton, the Illawarra flame tree, that's beautifully out in red at the moment. Yes, so there's a real mixture of different types of trees, yes. So it was a lovely collection to have around.
Lovely, and it's a lovely shady park as well, and you can just go there and enjoy.
There's a beautiful ginkgo that goes absolutely the most beautiful golden yellow in.
What time of the year does it? In autumn. Okay, right.
Yes.
So at any time of the year, there's something flowering and there's something beautiful there, is there?
Yes, and a couple of the gardens have got little shrubs, forming borders as well. So, and the council there's a couple of beds that they put annuals in, so it's never totally devoid. And even without flowers, it's a lovely park, and it's very, very popular and well used. There's hardly a day of the week goes by that there isn't carers there with disabled people, because of all the nice flat concrete pathways, and there's not a lot of slope on the land. They can manage walkers and wheelchairs, and they pull up and you can see all sorts of people there. People walk their dogs, they do their exercises there, running through. And
has the park usage increased or decreased over the years, do you think, or stayed always fairly consistent?
Increased.
Yeah, increased as the beauty of the park. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter when you go. Another thing we've got trial beds.
Oh, I wanted to ask you about the trials. You must have been looking at my notes, Sandy.
No, I can't read them. They're upside down. The we've got a couple of trial gardens, and we get roses from breeders and growers, and we trial them for 2 years. And they get marked by a team of 6. So there's 2 from the Rose Society, 2 from us, and 2 from council. And they can win gold, silver and bronze medals. And then we've also got another garden that's the Rod Holtgren Gold Medal Garden. And if a rose wins a gold medal with the owner's permission, it can be transferred and planted in that garden.
That's your acquisition program, is it? Sort of something like that. Right.
And it was lovely to have that in memory of Rod, because he was one of the big instigators of that aspect.
Right.
And there's only 2 big trial places in Australia. So it lets them trial them in a different climate and a different soil. And
what makes them successful? Is it the sort of the shape or the scent? Or
they get marked on growth and vigour, resistance to disease, resistance to heat, flowering ability, and a few other things. So they give us sheets with all of that in.
It's very
and
strict.
Why I was about to mention that is because I'm on the marking team, I go out at different times, and it doesn't matter when you go, there's always people in the park. A lot of families, there's a couple of barbecues, there's a playground, and a lot of children, young children, they take their little plastic trikes, and a couple of the gardens have got pathways that, like a figure of 8 in the centre, and it's just lovely because they're quite safe and they have a lovely time. And there's a couple of big gazebos that they used a lot.
Yeah, and the croquet, is that a part of your... No, that's separate?
Yes,
yeah.
But the croquet courts have been there a long time too.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of other things that were history. After the Second World War, when the soldiers came back, housing was in such short supply that they couldn't keep up. And there was a caravan park there to help accommodate them all until the housing availability caught up. So that was there at one stage.
Right.
And the actual cottage wasn't there. There were army huts there at one stage, but the cottage was brought in the 1950s because they thought that the youth of the area were becoming a problem.
Oh, they're always a problem, those youth, aren't they? Yeah.
So they had boxing and karate classes in the hall, and it was an old church hall that came from somewhere. Nobody seems to know where.
Right.
And so
somebody
it was used
probably
by that.
does know.
And then it was used by the Girl Guides for many years. It was given to them.
Right.
And then they'd stopped using it, and so it was offered to our group to use.
Right.
We hold our meetings and that there too.
It'd be good to have that hall
Which,
there.
if anyone wants to join, are at 1:30 on the first Monday of the month.
It's good, Sandy. That's what I'm here for. Promote your facility.
We'd always love new members.
Do you? How many members have you got?
We've got quite a lot on the books, probably about 150.
Oh my goodness.
But there's a lot of them that we don't see very often. Some of them don't live here but just support us. Others of them have done an awful lot in the past, but now are not capable, perhaps, of doing that. So there's a core that we see of meetings of about 20.
Mm-hmm. You're getting some younger members coming through?
We have. We've had a couple, and we've also picked up one who's a digital marketer, which is just fantastic.
Get that social media happening. Very good.
So, yes, that's been good. So, and she brought her friend along, and she brought her mother along. And the birthday, a couple of the functions we've had, her young brothers come along and helped us too. So once you get a few, it starts to build a bit. So hopefully we'll be able to regenerate a bit because we've got more projects that we want to do.
I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 102.7 FM Community Radio, and we're talking to Sandy Martin, who's the president of the Queensland State Rose Garden at Newtown Park in Toowoomba. And so we were just about to talk about your new projects. What are some of your new projects that are coming on?
Well, there's a driveway to go in on the top side of the cottage. It's there's a bit of blue metal there now. A few of the groups, like the bonsai group, have heavy things that they bring in to work on for their meetings. So the idea is to have a driveway that comes in that has a loop that they can pull up, unload their things, and then move their car. And it would also have more disabled parking on it. So I've been lobbying council because, as one of them said to me, a driveway's not very sexy, is it? You will have trouble with that, yes. So, and maybe they can get some funding through disability services because it will make a big difference to people that are disabled. So that's one project that's to go in. And once that's done, there's some little things that we can do, like a few extra pathways. The Alexander Clark Garden down in the corner is a bit out of the way at the moment, so we could link that back up to there. But the other big thing we want to do is we want a big old-fashioned bandstand. So
there's a rotunda there at the moment, isn't there? No?
There's 2 gazebos, like
gazebos,
picnic.
yeah.
Yes, but there's no actual bandstand.
Okay.
Apparently there was a small one a long, long time ago, but it's not there now. So that would bring music to the town and music to the park. And some of the bands, like the Municipal Band and the big Jim Miller Band, are very keen to play in it. So we've got plans for that. It will be a little off the ground, so we're hoping that it'll be a viewing spot over the garden as well. So that's the next big project
Sounds
that we're working on.
magnificent.
So RMA engineers have drawn up some plans for us, and I've applied to council to do a deposition.
Oh, yeah, a deputation.
Deputation to council to present and talk about it. And we're hoping then that a lot of the work that was done in the garden originally, a lot of local businesses came to the fore and donated goods or in kind or materials, and so we're hoping that some of that will come forward and that we'll eventually get our bandstand
Yeah,
done.
that sounds beautiful. So, Sandy, you mentioned the 3 original businessmen. Are they still alive?
John Orford isn't, he passed away, but the other 2 are, and they were both at the
21st.
anniversary day. Yes.
How lovely.
So that was
And
very,
really
very
celebrate.
good
I mean,
to
it
have
is
them.
a magnificent asset to the
Yes.
city, isn't it? It
Yes.
truly is beautiful. So what about you, Sandy? How did you end up being the president of the State Rose Garden? Can I ask?
Well, I'd been a member for a long while, but I had a nursery, so it was 7 days. So a lot of times, meetings at the time were at night, so I'd quite often get to a meeting, but I wouldn't get to go to things like Mother's Day and Father's Day because I'd be working. So I hadn't done an enormous amount. And then I was treasurer for about 4 years. And then I'd retired by then. So Regina had been president for a long while.
Regina Albion?
Yes.
Yeah.
So she'd eyed me off and decided that...
She liked the cut of your jib and you were going to be the next president.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So for my sins, that was how...
So you went from having a nursery, where was your nursery?
in Stephen Street, up near Anzac Avenue.
Okay.
And we had landscaping supplies and things too. And
How long did you do that
shopping
for?
and- 15 years odd.
Okay, so I've come to your magnificent home to interview you today, and you have got the most beautiful garden. So clearly you don't ever get sick of it. When you go from the Rose Garden, then you come here and work, and when you had the nursery, you worked there as well.
Well, the rain this time has been beautiful. This is probably the best it's ever looked.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, here I don't have Toowoomba's red soil, and we have a lot of gum trees left on the site. And between the 2 of them, when it gets dry, it's very, very hard gardening and quite depressing at times as to what you lose. And even that last drought, I lost things that had been in 25, 30 years. So, yes, but I
It's
do
almost
like
like
it, and I like
losing
our
a child,
surroundings.
isn't
and
it?
Yes,
Yeah.
so...
Today we were
yeah.
talking about what are your values? And one of the things that I wrote down was my core values is having visual stimulation, and I think that's what the Rose Garden is, and that's what your garden is. There's something so beautiful about seeing something growing and living, isn't it?
Probably for us, one of the worst aspects of COVID has been living here and watching our daughter, particularly in Melbourne, struggle to cope because she's been homeschooling as well as working from home. And she lives in the most beautiful house, but it's a restored Georgian cottage, and being Melbourne, you know, it has a little tiny garden and veranda at the front.
A little bit of astroturf.
No, it's actually planted, but it's only about 6 feet by 4 feet on 2 sides, and a courtyard that's paved at the back. And I mean, she has got gardens and pots and all sorts. But for the family, when you're housebound for weeks, it's not. Whereas here, they would have, when our kids were small, they had an acre and a quarter. They had a trampoline, a swimming pool, swings, a playhouse, and plenty of room to run around, and bigger areas within the house.
That's right.
So
but then you
it's-
think about those kids growing up in Europe who grow up in apartments.
I know.
So,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
yeah.
Well, I think, they do a lot of walking and a lot of, they're close to the beach.
And shared parks too, you know.
But see, at
shared
one stage
space,
they
yeah.
closed all the
That's
playgrounds.
true.
They couldn't even do that. So it has been very hard on them.
for sure.
And yet she's probably a lot better off than a lot of them were in Melbourne that live
Exactly,
in
in
much
the
more crowded
apartments.
areas.
Now let's go back to the roses. What's your favourite rose, Sandy?
I don't have a favourite particularly, but I do like the David Austins because the David Austins are all perfumed. And I really like roses with perfume. So that's probably, my favourite bit.
Your favourite. So every time you see them, you think, oh, that's
Every time
beautiful.
I see them, as I walk up the pathway, I smell them.
Yeah. And that can take you somewhere too, can't it?
Yes,
the scent,
yes.
Now, as the listeners would know, I usually ask a couple of silly, curly questions at the end. Now, Sandy, your question is, what's a song you know all the words to? Well, that you could sing if I put it on the karaoke machine for you.
Certainly not with the radio on. Probably a lot of the old Negro spirituals and things. We used to sing them in the car, as kids and in guides on campfires and some of the old Scottish songs, because I had a step-grandmother and she was from Scotland, so she used to have us singing different songs and things too.
Can you remember any of the names of them? Sometimes Patty finds the song for me and then puts it on. So can you remember any of the names of the Scottish songs or the Negro songs?
Oh, Jump Down, Turn Around, Pick a Bale of Cotton.
Oh, yeah.
Some of those and Kumbaya. So there's quite a lot of those we used to sing.
Exactly,
Yes. So.
Now, what about if you could ask for a miracle? What would it be?
Well, I think it'd be world peace.
That's very altruistic of you.
I know, but there's just so many parts of the world where people don't have the opportunities that we do. I don't think really that we appreciate how much we have and how well off we are. And when you see pictures of places, and we've travelled a fair bit too, places like Africa and some of the parts of Asia where the poor little children have virtually nothing, and even practical food and things, let alone there just seems to be so many conflicts and war-torn areas, and it's the children are the ones that suffer the most.
For sure, I couldn't agree more. I think when my husband and I went to India and saw a family living on a traffic island, that was probably one of the saddest things I've ever seen. I think, just eking out an existence, isn't it?
Well, our youngest, we did a trip to Hong Kong and Thailand, and then we went into China for the day, and we stopped and we went to something, and there was a little boy on the street begging, and my son said, "Why is he begging?" And my husband said, "He's probably hungry." And he said, "Well, why doesn't he just go home and get some food?"
It's not the lived experience, is it?
And when it was explained to him, he was absolutely horrified.
There is no home, there is no food.
And even a lot of our children don't get those experiences and don't have their horizons expanded, so they don't understand how well off we are.
Exactly.
And how poorly off so many are.
And how we can be so much generous, I think, as Australia, much more generous. We're a big country, we're a wealthy country. We can do a lot for the rest of the world. I couldn't agree more. Now, I'll just go on to my last favourite subject, which is the royals. So do you have a favourite royal and why? It can be from any era.
I think Catherine.
Catherine, tell me about... Catherine Kate now?
Yes.
Okay.
I think she's doing a wonderful job. I think she's down to earth. You see her with the children.
Philip.
Sandy's husband's just come in and added a little bit of background information. Philip from him, he says. Philip for you.
Philip, yeah.
Prince Philip. All right. So we've got Kate and Philip.
I like the way with Kate that she's still a mother. Her children obviously come first, and the way she handles them and speaks to them and the things she does with them, as well as the poise and the way she interacts with so many of the charities that she's a patron of. I think she's a really good role model and is doing a sterling job.
I couldn't agree with you more. And she looks like someone who laughs out loud, doesn't she?
Yes.
Like she's got that big those beautiful teeth, and she's sort of often seen, laughing, and they look like they really enjoy each other's company, her and Will's, don't they?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, well, that I often tell listeners is my guilty pleasure, spying on the royals and going through Instagram, spending way too much time looking at the royals. So I'm pleased to know that your favourite is Kate. But with that, I'm going to wrap it up, Sandy. But it's just been a wonderful trip to not down memory lane, but to hear about the State Rose Garden, and thank you for what you do, because I know that you probably do put in more than 50 to 70 hours of volunteer with but I mean it's just a magnificent asset for the city, and we just have to say thank you.
Yes,
so thank you. Thank you for having me. That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.